charts, for me the thing that is extremely, my mind cannot even, I cannot even process it, is that you created so many things, so much art that is totally different from each other. Like literally, like this and this, it's like a different person, like a totally different person that created this. How does this work?
My first, is this on?
You can have mine. We'll figure out what's happening here.
Is it on? Okay. On some levels, I suppose I am different people. Obviously, after 70 years, I'm who I am. But I think that one of the things I discovered along this way, I call it level 7, to be when you're in your 70s, and I don't know if anybody else is at level 7 here. That might make me the older or elder of the group here. But what I would want to communicate to you is that as you're developing whatever it is, whether it's the business or the art, and you find yourself going in more than one direction at a time, that there's something that in society often is a powerful force on you that will ask you to decide one thing and one thing only, and one thing at a time. And there's nothing wrong with that, because there's a basis in reality for that. But I have found that along the way, I've encountered these directors who I've worked with to collaborate with, Steven Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis and Jim Cameron and J.J. Abrams, who've made fantasies that many of you have seen throughout your lives. And what I'm trying to convey in this show on a personal level, but it's something I've discovered from them. And it's kind of a code a bit to, I think, vision and creativity on some level. And that is that there's often more than one thing happening at a given time. Obviously, there's a movie that's just come out, everything all the time, anywhere. I'm not even getting it right. But the point I'm making is the fragmentation that can be so threatening is something that if you can embrace it and find your own code with that, and then that actually means that you can, basically when you come to a fork in the road, you can take it. You know that you can have more than one thought at the same time. And so as you're exploring these various ways of moving this whole world that you're exploring now, I'm just trying to convey that the artwork that you see, from the individual to the film work to my own, what I call trip outs, it's about actually a visual philosophy. And that is that the world is bigger than just the linear from here to here to here. And that wherever you are, there is somewhere else that you can imagine. And I think that's what a lot of what I could tell from the speeches that you've been listening to, and all these endeavors that people are having, that you're putting together here, is what are the dreams that you're tapping into, and then how do you organize that? So maybe that's something I can address a little bit in regard to the movies I worked on, whether it's Star Wars or Avatar or Jurassic Park or Forrest Gump. And that maybe it starts to, for you, create a bit of an image in your mind that's personal to you, but it helps to drive why you're doing what you're doing. Like, why are you here? What do you think you're doing? Why are you believing in anything other than the tangible world that you are in? That's a big philosophical question. And maybe in the next few minutes we can at least address that. But what I'm trying to say is it's been right in front of everybody the whole time.
But is it a conscious decision? Like when you select this part of the road, is it consciously happening, or you're at a level where this just happens on its own?
It's almost the other way around, where when you're younger, you just do the best you can to survive the situation, because you're being inundated with so much information, so much peer pressure about whether you're really just an idiot or you're ahead of your time or behind your time or an outsider, whatever those things are that are so threatening, because your identity is not, quite developed. You haven't had that much time in the world breathing the atmosphere of reality, right? So you just do the best you can. But maybe after a time, you start to see there's a pattern that starts to emerge. The types of things that are leading you to what John Lennon used to call, that yes is the answer. You follow the yes. That's how he met Yoko Ono and just climbed up a ladder and way up there, this little with a magnifying glass says yes. And he said if it had said something like she'd written no or fuck you or like, you can't get there from here, he would have said, okay, well, there's another nihilistic point of view that has no meaning and I'm moving on. Instead, he followed a path. So Steven Spielberg, for me, has been a guiding light of optimism, a way of looking forward, of appreciating me and my vision that led into Robert Zemeckis, 20 years of just the two of them. So after that time, I started to see the pattern. So now I actually look for the pattern. So now when I engage, say, J.J. Abrams, and I'm actually looking for the pattern. Where is it going to reveal itself? And for me, it's often in the metaphor, that how people talk about something, they say something, they allude to something, and I say, there it is. That's the language. They're speaking to themselves, but maybe other people aren't listening. And so if I, as a production designer, can be one of those people that not only listens to what they're saying, puts things together that have not maybe been put together, but then maybe the most important thing is I start coming back with a point of view that I believe them. I actually believe what they're telling me. These stories are as though they're real. How can I make that as credible, believable, and authentic as I possibly can? That's how it grows. Each step you take, when somebody says yes to you and they get you and you can trust them, now you can start to build a team and it starts to become a process that hopefully you prosper with.
So you're like a dream translator. Somebody tells you a dream, like however they imagine, you translate it in order for me to understand it, an outsider, and then you create a visual language so everybody.
I think that's a very good way of putting it. I think that I've often thought that I have a bigger dream that I don't even know about, and then I encounter somebody like Steven Spielberg or Robert Zemeckis. They speak to me in a certain language. They're starting to guide me in my own dream. But then, because I'm starting to pick up on that, I can start to not only guide them, I can come up with visions that complement what they're talking about. So I'm going to be, some of what I'm saying I know sounds so abstract, but I think this group maybe would understand that, because if I try to apply it literally, which I probably can do, and maybe those points of reference would be very helpful, but what I'm really trying to do is do something that I do with the directors. Like I'm going to start treating you like the director.
Please do. I want to feel like Zemeckis, please.
Well, what I'm doing is I'm hearing what you're saying, what you're asking. I'm looking out here and I'm wondering, what do these people want to hear? I have no idea.
Me neither. I have no idea.
So the idea becomes, can I speak in a way where you're starting to have your own better idea? Whatever we say, are you starting to apply it to your own point of reference, whatever that is, and actually start to apply it and have a better idea? So just to give you an example, and then I'll try to eventually bring it back to you specifically, okay? Because we haven't spoken that much before, but a little bit. And I can see what you're doing and what you've facilitated with Jim and this gallery that literally is a blending of people, ideas, and sensibilities. So imagine that you're going into a dream state. Like we were just up at the Acropolis, and as my son said, it's like being in a dream. You can't often have that type of experience where what's on the inside of you is replicated on the outside, and then the outside is even greater than the dream, and now that starts to make your dream go that much more, and then you're actually looking up and you see something like what you see from the Acropolis, and then you look down, and now there's no other place in the world that's like that, other than my version somehow of what heaven might be like as a hierarchy. So now, okay, you're in that point. Now you're in the Acropolis. Now let's just take it to Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg is just a regular person. If you see The Fabelmans, which is a movie that's coming out, you'll see a lot about where his code internally comes from with his parents and how he's split between art and science. But the most important part of it is that, you know, if I'm talking to him and I have an idea, he'll look at me and he'll say, well, you know, that just goes to prove once again that some of my best ideas are not my own. And that means that what I just said, he can make into his idea, put it into his movie. It doesn't take the idea away from me. It doesn't mean that I'm not an author of that idea. It just means that he can appropriate in a collaborative way something that now is made bigger than either him or I. Then with Robert Zemeckis, because remember I said I worked 20 years just with them. So I didn't have to go all over the place. What I would say with him is I'd say some idea, and then he'd say, well, what I thought you were going to say is, and he'd have another idea, and it would go right into the movie directly the way he just said it. And I'd say, well, were you already thinking that before I started talking? He said, no, just as you started talking. So that means that his idea was happening within seconds. And yet it was so complete that it just meant I'd hit a level that sparked for him the idea that he could now latch on to. It also meant now as my job, I no longer had to be right. Can you imagine having a job you're getting paid for? You get to do something like Back to the Future 2, Go into the Future, or Forrest Gump. And whatever ideas I had, I didn't have to be right. I just had to spark the right idea. So then I got, finally, after 20 years of working like that, into the world with Jim Cameron, who had a tremendously complex world and wonderfully, a wonderful duality to it. And when you see the latest Avatar, The Way of Water, it's absolutely magnificent where it goes. I mean, just it's more than the first one, and it goes deeper and richer, and there's a whole code there. When I would talk, like probably half of you right now are going, what the hell is he talking about? Okay, so he would say, well, I don't know what you're talking about, but I like that we're getting so much done. Because we were making progress in actually making his movie. Now, the final thing I'm going to say on that level of those interactions is J.J. Abrams would say things like, when we'd be talking, say, well, I know there's something there. A bad version of the idea is this, the placeholder. It wasn't always a bad idea. It was just something that needed to get out into the world. Probably 3/4 of what you're talking about here amongst yourselves are not the idea that it will end up being, but it needs to get out there so that other people can begin to address it. I heard the questions coming back and forth, you know, in the last panel, and I was thinking, see, this is the people that are presenting this are also, they're hearing what you're saying as to whether that meets reality. So now I've said all this, and you're still saying, what? Well, I thought you were going to tell me about some anecdotes about Star Wars and Avatar, but I just felt like I wanted to philosophically take it to a certain level so that those anecdotes, whatever they are, they have a purpose to helping maybe the way you're thinking about something. And so say whatever you have to say, and I'm going to try at the end of this to bring it back to why are you even doing this?
I love it. I love it. You said visions, and it's strange that you use that word instead of saying like I had ideas about something. You said I had visions. Is it literally visions? This is how you create, how you manifest a creation?
See, this is interesting because for me, I hope it's interesting for someone else. This is interesting for me because this would be interesting to see actually. Visions are not visuals. You think vision is, but I'll bet not everyone, but I'll bet a bunch of you know what it is, and I'm sure for you that you know what a vision is when you start to feel it coming on. It's like a drug. It actually starts interacting with your brain on some level, It has not been illustrated yet. You have a feeling, and then you recognize that it's something that is like a vision. And that's, I think, what vision actually is, because it's not just the illustration that you could show to the outside world, nor the thing you can point at. It's the thing that's on the inside of your head. And that's why, there's this whole thing about the third eye and looking inward, and where is that? Is it Jungian? Is it biblical? Is it spiritual? The real thing is that you feel it, and it's something that the only word really to use is vision. So allow the vision to come even when you don't have the illustration. Then the illustration becomes a process. But now I can give you an example of that, where in Star Wars, The Force Awakens, number 7, we were developing the script as we were developing imagery. And I was asking a group of people I called the visualists, because they were going to now provide actual imagery. How strong is the Force? Why are we doing this? Why are we coming back into the Star Wars world? That seemed to be a fundamental question to me. Not something you can answer with words, but you have to start to create imagery. And the story was being developed at the time, but they hadn't figured out what's the dark side doing that is so threatening in that movie. And the funny thing is that most of you, even if you saw the movie, probably can't tell me what was the dark side doing. I mean, they could be coming, and they could come into a village with a flamethrower, and they could beat you up, and they could rape you and take your family and do whatever. But what were they really doing? What was so threatening? So I was asking that question of a group of people who were the visualists, including one of the people from before, who was like having Socrates with the group. It was Dennis Murin, who was the visual effects guru. And he said, I said, what would be threatening about the dark side returning in a Star Wars world? So he said, well, if the dark side could take the light out of a star, that would be, within the metaphor of Star Wars, very threatening. And I thought, there's a vision. And then it was J.J. Abrams who said, and let's make that something they use it as a source for a weapon. That's actually what the dark side's doing in that movie. That's their whole intent, is to destroy planets by using the light and the power they get from a star. The reason I'm bringing that up is because we didn't know what that would look like. So now the illustration of that's in the movie has to be developed so that you will believe it. And what would that look like? We ended up with it sort of like a blinking of an eye, but from both the top and the bottom. Where I'm going with this is to say, now, if you have that in your head, there's kind of a duality. It's like taking the good out of a star, turning it into the bad, and that is dark. So if we're talking about vision, it's something that is intangible, but it starts to fulfill the dynamics of usually a duality. So I'm going to just guess that the visions that most of you are having here about creating something that has some light to it is because you are doing this in relationship, not just to your ambition, but to something you feel is a darkness. And so that would then give purpose to why you would be doing this. Why are you trying to do something new? Why don't you just stay with the old ways? And they were good for people in the past. Why not just stay with that? But no, you have to find a new way. And why? And I think that's because you're reacting to something that you feel is got a darkness to it, and there might be a better way. Am I speaking just total, like, is it too weird, or? Remember, I'm in the hippie generation. Okay, because okay, thank you. I don't know what I'm saying when I talk like this, so that's why I have to look to you.
Everybody got quiet, like, was screaming all this time, so everybody's like,
okay. Okay.
So you're creating worlds, you're creating metaverses, and based on visions, but the visions are not visual. They have, it's like a reaction to something dark.
Well, I think it's philosophy. And that's the thing that I have come to feel, that I'm not the only one doing it. I'm just trying to, at level 7, say, what has it been? you know, for me, it's a personal journey. I'm just a young guy trying to find myself when I'm 20, going out into the world. And for me to be here, and then I can look over and see a little drawing I did, you know, when I was 20 years old, or my hair down to here when I'm, you know, in the hippie era. And I realized that I'm having a dialogue right now with that, who I was when I was younger. So those of you who are younger, you know, or it's like, you might someday get to be older and then be in that, it's a little bit of the Back to the Future thing, you know, where well, this is me just riffing, but just to tell you that you know, in Back to the Future 2, for instance, there is Doc Brown who goes and finds himself in the past. So in the movie, there's a pair of docs. So there's a paradox, because that's the paradox of time travel. And that was the code name that Bob Zemeckis gave to the movie we were working on it. So imagine right now, wherever you are, that you can project both ways into the future and have that dialogue as a pair of docs. Consider yourself one doc now, you'll be another doc later. But what about going backwards? You know, that type of travel through time sometimes it actually creates, I believe, a form of a philosophy. And so the visual philosophy that I've been involved with is called production design. But it's a part, the production design is part of the whole philosophy that's being created by the movies, each one individually, but then they almost form an epoch. And I think that's what's happening now. I think the reason you're having this, the reason you're doing this, has to do with that you recognize that the old ways are falling apart and that a new way is emerging, and you want to be a part of that, to rethink how things are structured. It may or may not be better, but at least it will be progression and new and vital. And so I'm guessing that for you, you know, it wasn't enough to just to go out into the world and make some deals that worked out well. You're bringing it back home, right? I mean, you're here because there's a reason that maybe being here, even in this gallery, to express something that's personal to you. And so even, I don't know how long we'll talk for, but I hope that I can say something that everybody go, oh yeah, that is him. That is why he's doing this. And I may not get there. Right.
We'll spend all night here until we get it. No,
Okay.
Do you think that world building can be a form of self-healing? Like a lot of people are trying to escape, but I don't want to use escape. I just want to know that, can somebody build a world where they feel better, and should they?
I think that, again, I think that you're hitting on something. So now I can begin to do what I'm saying would be the dialogue with the directors. So what did he just say? Is this other dimension that you want to create, is it healing? I mean, is that part of the fundamental that you're trying to create? You're creating because, of course, when you're creating it, that's a life force. That is the antidote to death and destruction. So you never have to really, I mean, up on the hill in the Acropolis, I mean, creation. Then think about the concept that originated here. I was saying this the other night, which is you have life, but you need to examine your life to have it really have something that's worth living. So that concept is not just universal. That's something that's from here. And I believe, maybe I'm just from the same, neck of the woods as you are, that is healing, and it does provide life, and that starts to become a basis of why you do things and why do you dream. Now, what is world building? Well, we're in a world, but so I often have trouble when I've been asked about world building, how do you build a world? Oh, well, I think of this, then I think of this, then I think of this. Yes, but really, if I'm to answer it more truthfully, it's never a single world, because there's the world that you're in, then there's the alternate world that you're looking to go into and have a dialogue and a vision that traverses both of those. And if you think of all these movies that you see represented here, I mean, there's nothing more obvious than to say you're on Earth and then you go to Pandora. That's 2. Now you're on Pandora. And I'm the one who said, if you're inside Hell's Gate, that whole complex, and you can breathe air as a human being, then that's Kansas. But the minute you go out there, that's Oz. And that's where Quaritch is saying, and out there, there's an Oz that'll, they'll eat you in their eyes for jujubes and that kind of stuff, the real tough guy stuff. But the other duality is you've got Quaritch, then you've got Neytiri and Ewa, and all of that, and think that there's one guy who's saying both of those dialogues. So this being one place in one world, your reality, then there's another. It keeps multiplying. It becomes over and over. There's a split in the path, and what these directors do is they take it. They take the split. They go this. Now they're Dorothy, Wizard of Oz. There's the Scarecrow. Some people go this way. Some people go that way. Some people go both ways at the same time. So really what I'm saying is the development of a world is the development of worlds. So look at what you perceive the world to be, look at what you want there to be, and then traverse those two. So you're not always caught like this. You're actually creating a third entity. That third entity is the space between those two things. And that's a philosophical idea. Part of it's Eastern religion, part of it's hippie culture. Read some Alan Watts. If you think you're only doing the thing, meaning the nouns, then you're not seeing the whole equation. And the best metaphor I've heard about that is from Alan Watts, where he says, think about music. What if you're a composer and they say, well, my job is really just to come up with the notes. I don't care what's in between them. Well, if you can't work out what's in between them, you don't have a melody and you don't have any music. And I think we often think too much about things. And I'm not saying you don't have to bring all of your thinking into things. In my world, I have to not only come up with the sets, the ideas, architectural plans, the vision, the budget, and often I'm designing the production in terms of what are we shooting, how are we shooting it, very pragmatic things. But the idea is that to find that way of going back and forth between both. So I don't really know what I'm addressing other than a philosophical level, and each one of you is obviously into something that you're really interested in doing. And you're interested in bringing some of this together in a collective way so that maybe the dialogue between people, maybe just almost serendipitously, just reinforces something, and then maybe the collection of that amounts to something more. And of course, that whole way of thinking is so fundamental to the ancient Greek legacy, because one idea was added on by another person. I mean, well, what would have happened if there was no students for Socrates, and especially if there was no Plato? Then we wouldn't know all sorts of things. So each one of us that you're bringing together, I think you're doing it because you're in a tradition of this, and I think that you couldn't do this in Los Angeles. No, you couldn't do this in Dubai. You couldn't do this in London. There's too many other things that would come in the way of it. Whereas I think you recognize that this is not only the technical side of it, it's the art form of it. That's why you even wanted to be in the Blender Gallery, because you recognize that this space feels creative. Now I'm just going on and on. I don't know what else to do. So, and stop me when you want me to.
No, I'm definitely going to stop. Like, these people will kill me if I try to stop. Everyone wants to hear everything that you say. The worlds that you're building, how personal are they? Like, do you wake up and you're like, I'm an avatar? Like, I cannot get it out of my head. Like, how does it work?
They're actually, as they've developed, very personal. And so just to give you an example, I'll take on a little riff, but don't worry, it won't go on forever. But Back to the Future 2, we were going into the future. I don't know what it's like to go into the future. So what I did was but I knew I wanted to be optimistic, create a place I'd never seen before. I knew that Hill Valley had red bricks. I thought, where have I been that I felt optimistic with red bricks around me? I thought of being in Kathmandu in 1970 when hashish was legal there, and being stoned in a place that I thought, I don't know where I am in time. It was so old and ancient and so current with the hippie culture and something in between, but I felt so good at the end of the hippie trail to have gotten there in the Himalayan mountains. I thought, if I can convey that sense, and that nature also is alive and vibrant within a commercial setting, which is why we put the pond in the middle of the courthouse square, then maybe we're creating a world that I would want to be in. The funny thing about that movie, of course, is that the thing that we predicted that was correct was not the thing that we did that went into the future. It's the thing that's represented over there, which is Biff lighting up a cigar with the $100 bill, who's based upon Donald Trump. So we came back to 1985. We actually had predicted what actually happened and maybe is still happening, which is incredibly disturbing, actually, because I feel like maybe we went forward and we did something that caused something to happen. But anyway, it was very personal because it was Kathmandu in 1970 being the age I was that's in these drawings. When I went to Jurassic Park, I thought, well, if dinosaurs really were to come back, this is profound. Another species that is used to being the dominant form of life on this planet in relationship to us. So I didn't want to make it like the pyramids where I've seen that as like structurally, what would the visitor center look like? I thought that would be just too much, and maybe even compete with the dinosaurs. So I thought of the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, and that's what I used my experiences there to be the basis of how we design the visitor center, which is, it looks like a place with thatched huts. When you go inside of it, it's actually with the rock and the skeletal structure. It's based upon that in my mind. Forrest Gump was, for me, a very personal story because it was my age, and the idea that there was a home that could survive all that whiplash in and out of time. I actually felt that was like a way of being almost a self-portrait. And finally, Avatar, which I would say was an interesting way that it got personal, because imagine if you were with Jim Cameron and you're hired to be a production designer and you don't see 3D.
Yeah.
I don't see 3D because I have a far-sighted left eye and a nearsighted right eye. They don't look and see the same thing at the same time. So if you're in a meeting and everybody's saying, well, do you think the interocular is working on that? And could that be better? I'm not seeing it. So at that point, there's a good example of how you can shrivel and go, oh, fuck, I'm out of my league. And not because something I did, but because who I am, the way my eyes operate. So instead, I internalized that. I thought, well, what's 3D to me? 3D has got to be this in here, the third eye. Where would the avatar state even come from? All the guy does is he's a cripple who gets put in an MRI machine and this thing whirls around, and then you see some graphics that show you that the nervous system is lining up, and the next thing you know, he's 9 feet tall and he's blue and he's running around. What? I mean, how would you get that past the studio to say that's my story? But I internalized that. I thought, I'm Jake Sully. I'm going to go to that place and I'm going to create from that point of view. And so all the designing that I did, the things that I could associate for Jim that he hadn't even thought of, like that we were in Kansas, if we're in a breathing area and we're going to Oz out there, we're encountering all the guides, all those steps that I was able to understand, or with Grace, the scientist who's played by Sigourney Weaver, that she's on a parallel trip trying to discover that interconnectedness that's basically at the bioluminescent AOA level. That all sounds really like, what? That's all in a movie? Well, you saw the movie, and the movie made $3 billion. So, and there's a sequel. So these ideas that seem pretty damn crazy can actually sometimes go out, and there might be one of them here that actually is going somewhere that you just don't know. So that's how crazy these movies are. They come out and you think, oh, those are all together, but they're not all together when they start. If some idiots like myself saying, well, how strong is the force? And that's how it's starting, you know. Anyway, I know I'm just tripping, but.
Do you ever become obsessed while you are developing these worlds? For example, while I was trying to set up the whole conference, whatever I do, I become like obsessed. Like a lot of people here that know that whenever I do any project, like cannot sleep, like I shower and I think about the project. I go running and I think about the project. I think about the project while I think about the project, like literally. Do you feel the same? You become obsessed, like you cannot stop thinking until it's done?
Yes and no. The yes is, of course, when I was younger. You get older and you realize I better sleep and I better rest. I mean, this is, the stress can be too much. Oh, yeah. I mean, the thing that you have is you've got your youth, and that's a wonderful thing. Learning to find that way to breathe in and out of the obsession, and to realize that sometimes the idea can come to you in various ways, and not only when you're thinking. And so to trust that other zone where that vision came from, so that you're not always dealing with details. Not that details aren't important, but that you're reminding yourself in an in and out way, what was the reason, the purpose that I was doing it. And when you get older, if you're fortunate to do sort of a similar thing through your lifetime, whether for me it's production design and my personal art and my family, then the real thing becomes, how do I integrate all of that into a being that then, and at level 7, just to bring it up again, you start to become aware even more that the physicality is important to preserve, because you just can't work at that one level all the time. At least I can't. And so I would say the answer is yes, but maybe the obsession takes on a slightly different. When you run, you run. When you eat, maybe you eat. Certain times, just you actually can see the sunset. You can maybe go up to the top of the mountain and just be there, and then to just feel. Not the obsession with bigness, but maybe the insignificance. And then you go there, and then the idea pops in your head again, and you go, oh yeah, that's why I'm a little ant, but I got a big idea. Yeah. And it's going to take me a long time to either go from here to there, or up the mountain, or down the mountain, but it's a long journey. So breathe. Some of that's, breathing is actually pretty darn important.
Was there any time when you built all these worlds for all these movies, when the movie ended, where you said, I didn't want this to be like that, I would prefer if it was like this, like not being 100% satisfied? Has it ever happened that, or does this happen all the time?
Yes, I have to say that I know a lot of people think like that, and I've never had to think like that. The directors I've gotten to collaborate with have always made it better than I could have imagined. The cinematographers, the editors. So I feel kind of fortunate just to be in the mix with those people, and that they've turned to me and asked me to help them fulfill their vision. It's become my vision as well, but also I've always, painted and drawn on my own, to always have that sense of what is it to face a blank canvas on my own, fulfill that, and then not look back, because actually sometimes even the things that are not so great, I mean, they're a stage of your life, and they're as good as you were at that moment. So I don't really do that very much, fortunately.
Oh, that's good, yeah.
Yeah.
So you create art non-stop. Like whenever I talk with Jim, he's like, yeah, he just did another painting and he's creating. Have you ever created music? And if not, why? Why not? Because music is it's a form of art, but it's close, but it's kind of different. It uses a different part of the brain.
Well, I tried one time. I did write the lyrics for a song once. And it was about falling in love with my wife, called Like a Yo-Yo. It made me feel like I was like a yo-yo, but in a good way. I love music. I think, like, for instance, with the Beatles, I was so influenced, and still am, but I visualized to it, and it's different than actually making a sound that anybody wants to hear. You know, that's a whole talent unto itself. So I don't think I'm that good with it. But I hope this isn't just too abstract, and you know, that, and maybe as an evening thing, it's good to go into the evening with. You wouldn't want to start the day like this.
Definitely. So, and I think that's all for today because it's already 6:30. I want to thank Rick for coming here to Athens and literally blowing